It's a documentary film which takes the human side of history, but because it's all first person, we also get to some very important, what are already historical truths. Like, for example, that, as the film makes very clear, the Russian intention to undo the Ukrainian state is part of a long-term plan. As the film also makes very clear, the emergence of Ukrainian civil society is also a long-term development. So those are two very important historical points that one can draw from the film.
The film is extraordinary. It is a gift to all of us. It's not necessarily an easy gift because it shows us both some of the worst of humankind and also some of the most extraordinary and best and human of humankind. We must know our history, and our history is world history. And this film gives us such a belief that there are younger generations who are remembering and looking into history and not wanting to repeat mistakes. And that's something very much that gives me hope.
People of Ukraine, this is your moment.
Перше я Пашку побачила, образ реально колоритний. Секс не то слово.
Зараз Путін хоче відновити Російську імперію.
Стрельби, крики, вокна. Це війна на винищення, і ми знали, що людей треба вивозити. Я з Донецька, то я ж і кажу, що я просто знаю, з ким воюю. Ми почали роботу по вивозу штатських.
Все нормально, їдемо.
Веду групу в бій. Слава Україні! Маємося разом.
Книжок, підпишіть мені, будь ласка. Давайте на наклейці.
You were recently in Ukraine, where you traveled around the country. Can you tell us a little bit about what you experienced during this last trip, and what, if anything, is the legacy of Maidan in today's Ukraine?
So first of all, good evening, everybody. So I'll start with the second question. I mean, of course, what Maidan means for Ukraine is first of all a question for Ukrainians. I have a couple of thoughts about it. One is that Maidan is certainly a very important turning point in this Ukrainian self-recognition. So, there's a lot of discussion. Most of it, I think, kind of pointless about what's a nation and what's not a nation. But for me, the central aspect of being a nation is self-recognition and the ability to take risks at the moment you choose to take risks. And Maidan is the beginning of that. Maidan is also a beginning. Maidan is also clearly the source of a lot of the Ukrainian self-organization.
which remains important in this war. So a lot of people whom I knew as what Ukrainians call volunteers in 2014 are also volunteers in 2022, and a lot of the relationships that people, and this is a subject in the movie too, a lot of the relationships that people formed, Maidan friendships in 2014 are still friendships in the much more difficult conditions of today. So there's certainly all of that. I mean, as you kindly say, I was just in Ukraine. I mean, it's the third time I've been in Ukraine since the war started. What I found is, it's a big subject. I was there because I wanted to go to the south, and I wanted to think about what it means for fields to be mined and ports to be destroyed, and I wanted to think about the Russian attempt to cut off Ukrainian food supplies to the rest of the world. So I was in Odessa, Mykolaiv, Khersonska Oblast. For that reason, I wanted to visit farms. I wanted to be in places where Americans don't usually go. One of the strange things about this war, very strange thing about this war, is how few people there are who are there to observe it. How few people there are to actually look outside of Ukraine. How few Europeans, how few Americans, how few people who are on Ukraine's side are actually there observing. It's very striking. So I wanted to make a few notes about what the South looks like. And as far as there's a big difference between now and a year ago. A year ago, as Kharkiv had been retaken, and there was the anticipation, and there was Kherson. There was a sense that maybe this thing could be over. Now it's more grim determination. We have to stay with it, and also a lot more realism about us, about the West. Pavlo says this in the film in a much earlier period, but it's a sentiment that I heard from high up, and also from regular folks, that it would be great if you would help us more, but whether we fight or not is not going to depend upon your help. And I think that realism about Americans and that realism about the rest of us is very important.
Афганістан сподівався, що хтось за них буде воювати, і програв. А ми ніколи не сподівалися, не в 14, не в 15, не зараз, що за нас хтось буде воювати. Ми будемо битися в незалежності, будуть нас підтримувати чи ні.
If we could just come back to the question of Maidan, Lesya. The film starts with Maidan, but I know that the film started much earlier for you. Tell us, why did you start with Maidan? What did Maidan mean to you personally?
I remember meeting one French, actually British journalist who lived in France. He called himself Franglish, and he came to Maidan and he said, "We are the motherland of revolution, and what are we? We're angry, we come to the streets, we break a couple of cars, we break windows, and then we go home. And then look at you, 3 months in the brick cold, and the level of self-organization is amazing." And I remember this feeling when people come together. Some women come and make coats and give them to boys who stuck in Maidan from November, and we're freezing. Our film star, Rima Zubina, making borscht in a big pot. People building barricades from ice. It's absolutely magic feeling. I think people who've been on Maidan, they will never forget it.
Це неймовірно, те, що тут зараз відбувається. Не знаю, чи ви знімаєте це. Мурашки йдуть.
History is unfolding in front of your eyes, and it's not a violent revolution. It was a space of creating the future. And I remember how Professor Snyder mentioned that totalitarian regimes, like Putin's regime or other totalitarian regimes, they don't have a vision of the future. They compete for absence of future. Whether Ukraine and what we experienced during Revolution of Granite or during Revolution of Dignity, it was this space cultural, intellectual space where the most interesting, the most talented, the most charismatic people met. And somebody was building barricades, somebody was creating defense units, somebody had a media group, somebody had constitutional group. And it was the space of creating the future and also having this horizontal connections, which was so different from Soviet Union and Russian Empire, which was vertical. Everybody were depending from their bosses, from somebody above you. But here, people would just meet, recognize it was this moment of instant recognition that, okay, this is my type of person. And two people meet and they start a project. And the reason why we decided to devote this theatrical release to the 10th anniversary of Maidan, it's to remind the world about this spirit. Unfortunately, we see that people are getting tired of watching explosions and tragedy. So for us, it was very important to keep engaging American society in helping Ukraine, because Ukrainians don't just fight for their life and their homes, but for democracy itself.
Dr. Snyder's book on tyranny is probably something that all of you have read. Incredibly important, small but powerful book. And in On Tyranny, Dr. Snyder, you offer 20 lessons for readers. One of the lessons is beware paramilitaries, which for you means don't take strike ball lessons from Russians. Which of those lessons from On Tyranny do you think were embodied, or what would you like the audience to take away and connect it to On Tyranny?
I wrote On Tyranny in a couple of weeks in late 2016 after Donald Trump had won the American presidential election. And I had been spending much of 2016 trying to explain to Americans that Trump could win and trying to explain what sort of politician he was. And my reference points for that, because I'm a historian of Europe, were chiefly the European 20th century. But many of these reference points were from the very late 20th century, late communism, but also from the early 21st century, and in particular from Maidan. So in 2016, at least in my world, the people who thought that Trump could win and had some idea what that would mean were Ukrainians, Russians, and African Americans. Not that those three groups were necessarily getting together to talk about this, but in my world, those were the three milieu where I knew people who were pretty sure that Trump would win and had an idea what it would mean. And my sense of Trump had a lot to do with Yanukovych, actually. That's kind of hard to explain that comparison to Americans, but, kind of second tier oligarch, who looks up to the bigger oligarch, someone who doesn't, who can win a presidential election for various reasons, shares some of the same political advisors with Trump. But who, when he gets to be president, isn't going to be representing the people in any kind of conventional sense. So, and then a lot of the positive lessons that are On Tyranny actually come from Ukraine and Maidan. So, which was a very lively moment for me too. It was a time when I ran a big conference in May of 2014, right after Maidan, called Ukraine Thinking Together, which is one of the better things that I've ever done, and one of the things that I'm proudest of. Because I was trying at that point to bring together French, German, European, British, American intellectuals. We ran this conversation in 6 different languages, one after the other. And the idea was that Ukrainian intellectuals would be thinking together with other intellectuals about what this meant, about what Maidan meant, about what the Russian invasion meant, which of course was already at that point underway. So my point is that it's a funny thing for me to explain what On Tyranny should mean, in a Ukrainian context, because a lot of it actually arose from a Ukrainian context. So in particular, one of the lessons, and I never know what the numbers are, because I change the numbers around a lot, so I can't actually remember. But one of the lessons is about corporeal politics. So, the notion that you have to be able to at some point, the point will come where you have to be able to put your body in the public space. And that is a lesson, of course, which comes from, Mustafa Nayyem and Likes Don't Count in the very beginning of what was then called Euromaidan in November of of 2013. And the very phrase corporeal politics, which of course has been used by a lot of people in a lot of settings, but I stole it directly from Vasil Cherepanin. He's the one who used it with me, and that's where I got it. I'm pretty sure. So the point is that a lot of what was in On Tyranny was a kind of application of an East European experience to American politics. That's what I could bring. In the last 5 years, I've had to learn a lot more about the U.S. For me, the most important lesson of On Tyranny, no matter who you are and what the setting is the lesson I put first, which is don't obey in advance. No anticipatory obedience. Don't accept as normal the things that are just because they're happening around you. You have to distinguish what you think is normal from what is actually happening around you, and be able to take some kind of action on the basis of what you think is normal. If you can't do that, right? If you obey in an anticipatory way, then none of the other lessons matter. You're basically already done.
Lesya, you had mentioned in the previous comment that the public attention around the world, in fact, has abated, somewhat slowed down vis-a-vis the war in Ukraine. But you are continuing to show this film with some energy. You started to reference some of the things that you were hoping people would recognize and take away, this spiritual rebirth that's evident in the film. What are some of the other things that you would like film viewers to remember, including those who are not of Ukrainian background? What will help energize viewers from watching this film? Because the war is continuing unabated.
There is a lot of grief and a lot of anger in this film, but I hope a lot of hope as well. But in terms of messages and lessons, I think the world should learn that you can't achieve peace by appeasing aggressors. And that's what we were experiencing. I remember first cuts we brought to New York University in 2014, and it was just an edit about revolution, and how also at that time it was so much attention. And then in 2015, 16, we get less and less attention to Ukraine. And I felt how Putin propaganda is winning and Ukraine is losing informational war because of the amount of this propaganda. So one of the lessons, I think, for people who have independent thought and can think is that we should really listen to the messages of the countries which having wars and conflicts. For example, in Chechnya, when the war was happening in Chechnya, there was much less attention to Ukraine, or in Ossetian war in Georgia. Just after one of our screenings, some girl came to me, eyes full of tears, and she just said 4 words: "I'm from Grozny." And she said, "I'm so grateful to Ukrainian filmmakers and to those who lost their lives there filming Ukraine, that you're documenting war crimes and you're proving to the world it's happening." And she was afraid that what if there will be another wave of Putin's propaganda? Will the West be able to deconstruct this propaganda? So I really hope that our film deconstructs a lot of these narratives by showing that this war was prepared, at least from 2007. It's just what we show in the film, maybe earlier.
Методика яка? Діти нікому нахер не треба. Вообще. Да? Тобто, нікому не треба. І ці діти предоставлені самі собі. Вот моя первая фотка, моя первая стрейка в 2007 году.
So, don't abuse aggressors. We need to stop them.
Yeah, so that answer reminds me of some smarter things I could have said about On Tyranny. One of them is one of the lessons in On Tyranny is believe in truth, and I think we can't do democracy without that. there are various, as Lesya says, there are various narratives coming from Moscow about this war. But the narratives don't have to be true. They don't have to be mutually consistent. They're just there to put your attention here, here, here. They're just there to deflate you, to demoralize you. And they're coming from a place which says there isn't any truth, right? You're just choosing among lies. And so just choose the lie that makes you feel the best, or choose the lie that, is most comfortable to you, or choose the lie that makes you feel like you're on the side, that you're with other people. I really don't think you can do democracy without truth, without actively seeking truth. And the connection between that and the film, of course, is that the way that you get to truth, or the way you try to approach it, is first person, by actually going to places and writing about things that you've seen and knowing people, right? It's a paradox of our time that we have ever more obsession with the news, but we have ever fewer people actually reporting the news, right? And so this is a crisis which one sees with respect to Ukraine, but not just with respect to Ukraine. So believe in truth. And then the other thing which I was thinking of as Lesya was talking, which is very important to On Tyranny, was something that Pavlo said. Oh, it was Svitlana, actually.
Вони використовують все. Вони використовують дружбу, кохання, найкращі почуття матері до дитини, дитини до матері. Вони взагалі не перебирають засобами, вони ходять по святому, і для них це норма.
Using love and friendship as a means to an end, right? And that to me is a very important political point. There are political systems which say that nothing is true, also in the sense of nothing is good, right? And so since nothing's really good, there isn't really friendship. We all know, that it's all just a show. There isn't really love. There isn't really friendship. It's all just a show. It's all just manipulation. It's all just the strong manipulating the weak with fear. That's one approach to life. And it's the KGB approach to life. It's the NKVD approach to life, right? And it's functional. It works. You can treat the world that way, and you can succeed in certain things. But that's different from saying, and it sounds a little bit naive, but that's a little bit different from saying, well, actually, friendship is true, and love is true, and family is true. And there are truths, right? There are these things which are morally true. And then, the third decade of the 21st century, that sounds a little bit naive. But again, I think in politics, you can't do without that. Because you can see the feel to the people who say, I'm just your friend because I have some goal. And at the end of the day, that goal, that ends up undermining the idea of friendship, right? So Pavlo has to doubt not only his friend, but he also has to doubt the idea of friendship itself. And that's the point, right? When the Russians talk about today about how, the Ukrainians are all Nazis and they're refighting the Second World War, it's not just that that's not true and idiotic, but it's also meant to undermine the memory of the Second World War and the meaning of the Holocaust and the meaning of everything that one might be remembering about the Second World War. So it seems to me there's a very important political point there that is everything just a means and there's no end, right? Which is kind of Russian politics. Or do we actually believe that some things are ends in themselves? Are we willing to say okay, some things actually matter? I'm willing to say I care about this, that, and the other thing.
Sorry, can I reply to that? It's also provoked some thinking. People sometimes ask, how come most of Pavlo's friends became separatists and he didn't? And I was thinking about, not only he had his heart in the right place, but he was from Donetsk. And I think my interpretation of it, because he knew history, because he was studying history, and because of that, he had an independent way of thinking, comparing things, making his own conclusions. And I think one of our lessons is learn history.
Так що, діти мої, вчіться гарно, вмійте воювати, щоб москалі на вас не нападали.
In your biography, Professor Snyder, there is a hint at a new book forthcoming. Are you at liberty to tell us what we might be expecting?
Oh, sure. I can say whatever I want.
I don't know, maybe your publishers will do this.
I don't live in that world. So I'll give you 2 sentences about what it's about, and then I'll try to connect it to this because it's also connected. The book is called On Freedom, and it's a philosophical account of what freedom is, and it arises from On Tyranny and Road to Unfreedom. On Tyranny is a kind of political pamphlet about how to defend things, and then Road to Unfreedom is a history of the 2010s, chiefly rooted in Russia and Ukraine, but then moving to America, where I'm trying to describe the contemporary history of the collapse of, let's call it, democracy. And in talking about those 2 books, I was constantly asked the question, okay, if you're defending something, what is the thing that you're actually defending? What is this freedom? What's a positive vision of freedom? And how should America be? What should a democracy actually be like? And I think those are the essential questions, because I think in the end, you can't really defend without knowing what you are defending. You can't just define yourself in terms of your opponent. I think if you're in that position, you're inevitably going to lose. So this is not a history book, it's a philosophy book, and it's meant to actually define what freedom is. And I won't try to spell out the whole argument, but essentially it has to do with freedom being positive. That freedom is that state in which you are capable of, not just allowed to, but capable of defining what values are important to you and trying to balance them and realizing them in your life. And this notion of, like, I finished this book a couple of times. This is what happens when you write books. You think you're done, and then it turns out you're not done. And so one of the things I've been doing this the last couple of years in traveling in Ukraine has been to carry the manuscript with me, and then to revise it along the way, which is what that's what the Ukrainian-Polish border is incredibly good for. Like, you get these like nice long moments where you can take your manuscript out and put it on the trunk of the car in front of you and just like work on it in like complete peace, because nothing's going to happen for a long time. That's a true story. The train rides are also great for that. So, but one of the things I got from Ukraine has been it's in the film very much, that and there are a lot of details from Ukraine. Like I'm citing people from Ukraine. I'm citing conversations with Zelensky, but also with lots of other people, with veterans and with widows, and lots of people. But one thing which comes shining through, and this is also a point which the great journalist Natalie has made in some of her important journalism, is that the notion of freedom that one encounters tends to be positive in the sense that it's about the future, which is about Maidan, which is very directly connected to Maidan. Like this notion that we were on the way to something better, and then they got in the way, but they're not the important thing. It's the future which is the important thing. Like, it's all the futures that we could have gotten to. That's the important thing, and it's striking to me anyway that appears to be true about this war as well. Like, it's not the Russians themselves that are the problem. It's, that they've gotten in the way of these futures which we think we were on our way to. And that strikes me as being very important, because, I agree, the point is very important. Like, politics, like a positive politics, an affirming politics, a confident politics, has to be located somewhere between a present and a future which you can imagine and you think you might be able to achieve. So I got a lot of other things from Ukrainians, but that's to me was a very important point.
I also wanted to mention that Professor Snyder is encouraging those who can and are interested in supporting an initiative that's part of United 24 called Safe Skies. This is a drone detection fundraising effort. If you go to United 24, you'll be able to see the information right there on the website. So those of you who can and are interested, please do help. One last question for the director of the film. What is next for this important film, and what other projects do you have in the wings?
After this release, we're already getting a lot of invitations to come to different cities. We already traveled all over the world, to 4 continents, even to Australia. But I really want to show it more in America. And of course, we're working towards official distribution because we want more people to see this film. As for other projects, during this 10 years, we filmed more than 500 hours of footage. And we have amazing characters that didn't make it to the film. And my dream is to do a docuseries, which will be this visual history of the last decade with the flashbacks to the past. Because when we were making this film, one of the challenges was the context. Many people didn't understand the context or historical context. Some people asked, what's the big deal? Why Ukrainians are dying? What for? And I felt that we tried to do it in this film. For example, when Sashko Kravchuk talks about Holodomor and what happened when Ukrainians came home and didn't stand up to defend themselves, or some other flashbacks. But with this series, we want to show much more about this decade and also explain a little bit more about Ukrainian history. I'll just give you one example. One of my favorite characters that unfortunately we had to cut from this film was Sergei Maidan, the first victim of Maidan. And we have absolutely unique shots. Ruslan Babitsky, my co-director, he filmed him a day before he was shot. And he was in this very strange state. He was almost describing his own death. He was talking how snipers are shooting from the roofs. And then it was an incredible story. I knew that I had to come to his funerals, but police was already searching the cars. It was very dangerous to go out from Kyiv. So I just called all my friends, writers, musicians, painters, and they found Boris Yekizaryan, the Ukrainian painter, who found Armenian taxi driver. So we drove taxi to Dnipropetrovsk region to these funerals, and we met his family. And it was this very emotional experience of hundreds of people coming to say goodbye to a person they never met. And the experience of this family who ran from one conflict in Armenia to lose their son in Ukraine. We have stories like this. And it was just so powerful, so emotional, so heartbreaking. It was in the middle of the film that it was almost impossible to keep watching. So we have also very inspirational stories. We have some of the characters of Maidan. We have this girl, Bogdana Babic, who created this whole movement of streamers when she just asked people who have iPhones, let's just stream 24/7. And there were many people streaming, and that's how the world saw it. So there are all these amazing stories when people get together, even in the middle of horrible war, and they're still working on creating the future for those who will come back from the front lines. So my dream to create this series where we show some light at the end of tunnel and where we show how Ukraine wins.
We literally have time for just a few questions, and although Dr. Snyder said don't obey in advance, you will obey what I'm about to tell you, which is you will keep the question short and to the point.
Lesya, дякую вам дуже за фільм. Lesya, thank you so much for the movie. I don't think it can be overstated how important it is. I want to get super practical. Professor Snyder, your Yale course was amazing, but here in the US, sometimes we get 2 minutes to explain something to the Western audience. Why should they care about Russian invasion of Ukraine? So, year and a half into the full-scale invasion, what do you think would be the best, short, sweet answer to the people that we meet along the way every day?
I mean, if you want a practical answer, there are lots of different kinds of Americans, and they want to hear different things. We are a very polarized people, and the fact that Ukraine is one of the things that we agree on gives you a sense of what it's like on all the other issues, right? Ukraine is like Ukraine and China are the closest things to consensus issues in this country, right? So there are different kinds of Americans, and they want to hear different things, and there are different true things that you could say. But for one kind of American, it's very important to talk about democracy and the defense of democracy and taking risks for democracy. And that kind of American is also going to be interested in hearing about the pluralism of Ukrainian society, the importance of civil society and women in the army and the diversity of the country and things like that, right? There's another kind of American who wants to hear about patriotism and risk-taking and Russia And that kind of American wants to hear about how, Russia is a continuity of the Soviet Union, right? And these things are all true in some way. But most Americans in politics can agree about the importance of some kind of world order if you just invade countries randomly for idiotic reasons and violate international law. Most Americans in politics agree that's bad. And another thing which I think Ukrainians don't hit hard enough is China, that the Chinese are watching this, and not just China, but everyone is watching this. And if we are not able to win in Ukraine, which the Chinese and everybody else thinks is an easy case for us, then we're going to be incapable of doing it. They're going to judge us incapable of doing things around the world. So I wish there was just like a magic elevator pitch you could use on all Americans, but it's very important actually that Ukrainians are more sophisticated about us than like Poles and Czechs were in 1989. That's very important. You've got to keep getting more sophisticated about us and thinking about how you talk to different Americans, because there isn't a magic bullet. And as time goes by, the arguments also have to change.
Thank you for the question. Next question.
The question is for Professor Snyder. From all your knowledge, what would it take for Russian society to wake up, for Russian people to get to the senses and realizing where they are and stand up? I don't think Putin's staff would do it. What is it that you think would possibly create opportunity for Russian society to basically get moving together with the rest of the world?
I mean, by the rest of the world, you mean the people we like. Yeah, because where they're moving now is in direction of China, which is Putin's geopolitical inheritance. I think that's how he'll be remembered, by Russian. If there is a Russia 100 years in the future, and Russian historians writing Russian history, I think the main theme of Putin will be, this was the moment when we threw away our chance to balance between East and West and instead made ourselves vassals of China. But I think the standard you're setting is a very high one. I'm very, very skeptical of the ability of the United States or Europe or really anyone else to directly affect the course of Russian politics, let alone Russian society. I think in a way, I completely get where you're coming from, and I think about it all the time as well. But I think in a way, like seeing it that way appeals to American vanity. Like we would like to think that we changed things in the Soviet Union, but the truth is that if you look at the last 35 years, right, this is my American we, right? So other people can have other views, but we thought it was important for the Soviet Union to stay together. That was our foreign policy. We worked very hard at it. We failed, right? We thought it was very important to support Yeltsin. We thought it was fine that Yeltsin attacked the Russian parliament. Maybe a mistake. We thought that we could do business with this guy Putin, and it was fine. We could pivot to Asia and do a reset with Russia. That was going to work out. There is really no moment. I'm not trying to be particularly critical of any of those administrations, but there's really no moment where you can say we understood what was happening in Russia, we pushed in the right direction, and things went the way we expected. It simply hasn't happened yet, and I don't expect it to happen. My view of our Russian policy is that the best Russia policy is a good Ukraine policy. That the only way that we can actually influence Russia in the right direction is by supporting Ukraine. And in Ukraine, we actually can make a difference. We have friends. We more or less know who we can trust. It's a much smaller scale. Ukrainians need help, right? So, and in building, in defending Ukraine, so there's a positive and a negative side of this. The positive side is if Ukraine gets through this and is a successful constitutional pluralist society, it then becomes a model for Russia down the line. It shows that such a thing is possible, right? I won't use the words that Russians use to describe Ukrainians, but the point would be that if those, XYZ can do this, then why can't we? That's the positive. The negative is also very important, which is I think the very best thing that we can do for Russia, and this is more of a collective, we and Ukrainians come first in this, is to make sure they lose the war. That's the best. And I should say the Russians, the Russians, and it's not a long list of people I'll refer right at this point, but the Russians who I care about and trust are all people who, fervently wish to lose the war, right? And that's because they care about their country, right? That's because they understand this logic, which is that so long as you fight imperial wars and don't lose, that's where all your politics is going to be. And there's a longer trajectory of European history which shows that, all these countries which work very well right now, Germany's Exhibit A, they all had to lose an imperial war first, right? So I don't think we can affect Russia. I think we always go wrong, but that directly. But I think we go right when we try to make Ukraine a model and when we try to make sure that Russia loses this war.